The worst sound I heard that night wasn't the alarm at the station. It was a woman's voice, soft and shaking behind the police tape, asking me, "When they called through the radio, did any of them say your name?" I was still on my knees in the frozen parking lot when she said it. My gloves were slick from grabbing the truck, my lungs still burned from whatever I'd breathed inside that building, and my captain's voice was still breaking apart through the rescue speaker in a way no human voice should. And somehow the thing that scared me most was the look in her eyes. Because she didn't look confused. She looked like she'd been waiting 10 months for someone to answer yes. The call came in a little after midnight. One of those hard winter calls that drags you out of shallow firehouse sleep and makes the whole world feel hostile before your boots even hit the floor. I'd only been with the department a few months, so technically I was still the rookie, which meant two things. First, I got blamed for things that happened before I was hired. And second, if something weird happened, everyone looked to see how badly I'd handle it. Usually I leaned into the jokes before anyone else could. That night I came out of the bunk room in gym shorts and a t-shirt, walked into the freezing gear room, and shivered hard enough for Osgood to grin at me over his suspenders. "Little cold there, rookie?" "Only emotionally," I said, stepping into my turnout pants. "If somebody wants to hold me on the ride back, I'm open to support." Fuller laughed. Osgood rolled his eyes. Price, already in the driver's seat by the time we hit the bay, didn't say anything. Price almost never wasted words. He was the kind of firefighter who looked like he'd been born already disappointed by everybody else's timing. I climbed into the cab beside Fuller, buckled in halfway through motion, and checked the dispatch notes on my phone. Forcible entry, victim trapped inside building, then the address. At the time, it didn't mean anything to me. To the others, it did. Osgood twisted in his seat and said, "You know where we're going, right, Price?" "Yeah." "That old supermarket?" "Yeah." The way he said it made me glance up. "What's wrong with it?" Fuller answered before Osgood could. "Place shut down almost a year ago." "Abandoned," Osgood corrected. "Not shut down, abandoned. Overnight, pretty much." I frowned. "So somebody broke in?" "Maybe," Fuller said. Osgood looked back at the notes. Caller repeated, "I can't get out," a few times, then line disconnected. "Prank," I said, because I wanted it to be that simple. But Fuller shook his head. Call came from the landline in the manager's office, inside the building. That changed the air in the cab. Not a lot, just enough. Like when you're joking in a room and realize one person isn't. Price drove faster than I liked. Streetlights kept sliding over the windshield in weak yellow bands, and the heater in the truck never seemed to reach the back seats. I pulled on my coat and tried to ignore the feeling that the address had already made the others quieter. Osgood told us to go on air before we arrived. "Building's been sealed a long time," he said. "I don't trust what we're walking into." I wanted to complain about the extra work of swapping cylinders later, but I didn't. There's a line between being funny and being the guy who sounds scared. I was a little too new to know how to manage that line gracefully, so I just put on my pack. The strip mall looked dead before we even rounded back to the supermarket. Most of the storefronts were black. The ones that still had signs looked half forgotten, like businesses hanging on out of pure stubbornness. The parking lot was full of potholes and dirty snow. Half the streetlights were dead. The other half flickered in a way that made the whole place look like it couldn't commit to being real. I remember thinking it looked less like a shopping center and more like a movie set after everyone went home. Then we pulled around back. The building itself was worse. Old brick, rusted loading dock, metal service door at the top of a stained concrete platform. No activity, no vehicle. No sign anybody had been there at all. Fuller grabbed the axe. I took the Halligan. I was already moving toward the door frame when Price touched my shoulder. "Try before you pry, rookie." I hated when he was right, mostly because he usually was. Osgood pulled the handle. The door opened immediately. That should have comforted me. It didn't. For some reason, it made the whole thing worse. Because if the caller had gotten in there, they had either walked in very easily, or somebody had been expecting them. We masked up, went on air, and stepped inside. The hallway beyond the rear door was narrow and cold, all pale block walls and old gray flooring. Our flashlights cut through dust that floated so thick it almost looked alive. Osgood called out once. Nothing answered. The office was just where the pre-plan said it would be. Empty. But the phone was off the hook, dial tone still humming. I remember staring at that receiver in the dark and feeling my stomach tighten in a way I didn't understand yet. Somebody had been close enough to the exit to hear our truck outside, close enough to leave, close enough to survive. So why call 911 instead of walking out? That question stayed with me even after everything else got louder. We moved deeper in. The next metal door was jammed half open, like something on the other side had swollen against it. Osgood put his shoulder into it and forced a gap wide enough for us to squeeze through. And that's when the smell hit. Not smoke, not rot exactly. Wet insulation, spoiled food, mold, old water, and something heavier beneath it all. Something biological. Something that didn't belong in a building. The stockroom looked like it had been swallowed by fungus. Shelves, walls, freezers, floor. Everything under a thick, pale overgrowth that climbed and spread in strings and mats and bulbous patches. The beam from my flashlight kept catching on it instead of cutting through. It looked soft in some places, fibrous in others. I remember thinking it didn't grow like mold was supposed to grow. It looked hungry. Fuller swore under his breath. Price just stared. I said, "What the hell happened in here?" Nobody answered me. Osgood made the call to search anyway. Quick perimeter, then out. Find the victim if there was one. Radio if we saw anything. That's how Price and I ended up together on the right side of the store, while Osgood and Fuller peeled left. I was never close with Price. He didn't dislike me. He just seemed to belong to some older version of the job I hadn't earned access to yet. Talking to him always felt like stepping into deep water and pretending I knew how to swim. So for a while we moved in silence. The spores got thicker the farther in we went. That's what they looked like anyway. Spores floating in the beams of our lights like dirty snow. My breathing sounded too mechanical inside my mask. The supermarket aisles kept materializing and disappearing in fragments. Frozen foods, canned goods, cleaning supplies. All of it left exactly where people had abandoned it 10 months earlier, like the place had been paused instead of closed. Then I saw movement, just a flicker down one aisle to our left. I stopped. Price stopped too. What? I thought I saw somebody. He didn't question it. He just radioed Osgood, told him we were checking, and turned down the aisle with me. Canned goods. I remember that stupid detail because it felt so ordinary. We got halfway down before realizing it was empty. Price was already lifting his radio again when something crashed behind us, glass shattering against the floor. We turned. A jar lay broken in the middle of the aisle. No person, no hand, no explanation. Then Price was on the ground. 1 second he was beside me, the next he was ripped backward so violently that his flashlight spun across the floor. He was sliding on his back, hauled through the mold by something I couldn't fully see. He grabbed a shelf brace and held on. I ran after him. By the time I reached him, I saw it clearly. Something like a long cord of pale, living growth was looped around his leg. Not vine, not root. It moved too fast, too deliberately. I swung the Halligan with both hands. It severed. What was cut loose whipped across the floor like it was angry. The rest vanished into the dark. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Price stood, looked at the thing still writhing near our boots, and said, "We're leaving." I'd never heard fear in his voice before. That was somehow more terrifying than the creature itself. He tried dispatch. I tried Osgood and Fuller. Neither answered. Then Fuller screamed, not through the radio, through the building. I felt it in my chest before I understood what I was hearing. Price ran first. I followed. The pass alarm started up somewhere ahead, shrill and urgent, echoing through the store. We rounded into what used to be the meat department and found something I still can't fully describe without feeling my throat close. The display cases had burst outward. The growth there wasn't spread across surfaces anymore. It had gathered, thickened, become one heaving, pale mass rising from the ruined coolers and pulsing with trapped movement beneath it. Shapes pushed against its surface from inside. An arm, a shoulder, a face maybe. I don't know. I don't let myself know for too long. Osgood was half gone already. His past was screaming from somewhere inside that thing. His light flashed once, twice, then disappeared. Fuller was still alive when we reached him. He was tangled from the waist down, swinging his axe wildly, dragging himself backward by inches. I went for the tendrils around his legs. Price grabbed at one around his torso. For one impossible second, I thought we were actually going to pull him free. Then something hit Fuller's mask. It cracked. His scream got cut short. Price dragged me backward so hard I nearly lost my footing. Go! I hate that I went. I hate that even now part of me knows he was right. We ran. The thing followed. Not as one body, in pieces. Tendrils whipping through aisles, lashing at shelves, reaching for us from the floor and walls like the whole store had decided we were no longer welcome in it. I heard Price breathing harder beside me, heard the stutter of his low air alarm too late. When I looked back, he was crouched, one hand at his regulator. He saw me stop and shouted, "Move!" Then one of those pale cords took him around the arm, another around the shoulder. I started toward him and he actually shoved me away with his free hand. "Go, rookie!" That was the last thing he ever said to me like himself. I ran through the stockroom, through the jammed door, down the hallway. Something caught my air pack from behind and nearly spun me backward. I tore free of the straps, abandoned the whole SCBA, and hit the outside door without air in my lungs. I don't remember much about those next few seconds except cold. Cold air, cold concrete, cold metal on the truck as I caught myself against it and dragged in the first real breath I thought I'd ever taken. Then I heard the radio. At first I thought it was dispatch trying to raise us. It wasn't. It was Osgood, or something wearing his voice. He was screaming so hard the words broke apart, but I heard enough. My name, then Fuller, then Price. Each voice layered over the others, distorted, begging, panicked, too close together. I climbed into the officer's side of the cab and reached for the radio to kill it. That's when I heard her. "Don't answer them." I turned. She was standing just outside the open door, on the far side of the police tape like she'd stepped out of the dark itself. Mid-20s maybe. Dark coat, hair damp from sleet, face pale in the rotating red lights. She looked too calm and not calm at all, which I know makes no sense until you've seen someone who's holding themselves together one thin thread at a time. A cop was saying something to her behind me, but she didn't take her eyes off me. "Did they say your name?" she asked. I stared at her. She stepped closer, just enough for me to notice how tightly she was holding her own hands together. "Did they?" I nodded before I could think better of it. Something in her face broke, not outwardly. It was smaller than that, just a flicker, like she'd spent months hoping to be wrong about something and finally understood she wasn't. The officer at the tape moved in. "Ma'am, you need to step back." She ignored him too. "How many went in?" she asked me. "3, I said. Her eyes shut for half a second. When they opened, they looked full of old blame. "My name's Mara," she said, "and if you want to know what took them, don't let anyone tell you this started tonight." I spent the next 4 hours giving statements to people who wanted facts and had no use for fear. Battalion chief, police sergeant, city hazmat. Everybody asked the same version of the same question. What did you see? The problem was, the more honestly I answered, the more their eyes changed. Not disbelief exactly, worse, professional politeness. The kind people use when they've decided trauma is doing some heavy editing. The only person who didn't look at me that way was Mara. She waited until dawn, didn't interrupt, didn't push, just stood by a patrol car in that dark coat while snow started falling in thin, dry streaks. A detective brought her coffee at one point. Tall guy, nice jawline, too familiar with her. I remember hating him for absolutely no mature reason. That should have embarrassed me more than it did. When I was finally done, she was still there. I walked toward her because apparently that was what the night had become, moving toward the one person who looked like she knew what nightmare we were in. "You work there?" I asked. She nodded. "Assistant manager." "You said it didn't start tonight." "It started 10 months ago." The detective came over then. Mara, just her name, but there was history in it. She glanced at him. "I'm fine, Rowan." I hated how softly she said that too. Rowan looked at me, then at her. "You don't have to do this right now." "Yes," she said, "I do." He hesitated long enough for me to notice he cared about her. Then he handed her his card and stepped away. Petty as it sounds, the fact that she tucked his card into her pocket instead of throwing it out bothered me. I was exhausted, freezing, and probably in mild shock, and somehow jealousy still found room. Human beings are ridiculous like that. Mara led me to the all-night diner across from a gas station 2 blocks away. We sat in a booth by the window while dawn turned the parking lot colorless. I hadn't realized how badly my hands were shaking until she slid a mug of coffee toward me and our fingers brushed. Mine were cold. Hers were colder. For a second, we just looked at each other. It wasn't romantic in any obvious way. My friends had just died. Her face looked carved out of sleeplessness. But there was something painfully intimate in the silence. 2 people too wrecked to pretend they weren't. "You should eat," she said. "I don't think I can. Neither can I." That almost made me smile. Almost. She wrapped both hands around her mug and stared through the steam. Officially, the store closed due to financial loss and contamination. Officially? Unofficially, she swallowed. People started disappearing after close. I didn't speak. If I heard somebody else say that, I'd think they were unstable. So you don't have to make the face you're making. I don't know what face I'm making. The one where you're trying very hard to stay polite. That did make me smile, just barely. Maybe I deserve that. Her mouth twitched like she wanted to smile back and didn't trust herself with it. Then she told me. It started with the intercom. After the store closed at night, someone would hear a voice over the speakers. Not random, someone specific. A mother, a boyfriend, a kid. Always somebody they loved. Always somebody who either wasn't there or couldn't possibly be. At first, people laughed it off. Then one stock clerk followed his dead brother's voice into the dairy cooler and never came back out. Then Mara's cashier heard her own daughter crying near the loading dock. They found her shoes by the back hall. Nothing else. By the 3rd disappearance, Mara tried to close the place herself. Corporate overruled her, said stress was spreading paranoia, told her to take a few days off. She didn't. Her fiancé worked inventory. One night he heard his father's voice coming from the meat department. She paused there, looked down, pressed her thumb into the paper cup until the lid buckled. "I grabbed his coat," she said quietly. "I was right behind him. I had him." The diner went very still around us. "What happened?" I asked. Her eyes lifted to mine, and I'll never really forget that look. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. It was just honest enough to hurt. "He heard me say his name," she said, and he looked back. I frowned. "That thing learns people by voice," she said, "by attachment. If it hears love clearly enough, it uses it, better each time." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I let it go. "The 911 call," I said. She nodded once. "It's done that before." So the person trapped inside wanted you to come in. I leaned back hard against the booth. Outside, two teenagers laughed while pumping gas. A truck rolled past. Somewhere, a coffee pot shattered behind the counter and a waitress cursed softly. The world stayed insultingly ordinary while Mara told me something impossible in a voice so calm it made belief feel less like a choice and more like surrender. "Why didn't you tell the city?" I asked. "I did." A bitter little laugh escaped her. "Try telling officials that an abandoned supermarket is imitating dead people through an intercom system. See how far that gets you." "And Rowan?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" I looked down at my coffee. "No reason." That almost smile came back, smaller now, sadder too. He was the responding officer the night Daniel disappeared. Daniel, there it was, the fiancé with a name. Something in my chest tightened in a way I had no right to feel. "He kept checking on me after the store shut down," she said. "That's all." "That's all," I repeated, sounding more annoyed than I meant to. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Awkward silence settled between us. Heavy, embarrassing, real. Then she said, softly enough to save my pride, "You don't need to be jealous of a man who reminds me of the worst night of my life." I looked up. She held my gaze for a long second, then looked away first. That shouldn't have mattered. It did. I didn't sleep the next night, or the one after. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Price telling me to move. Sometimes it came through the static of a radio that wasn't even on. Once it came through my apartment speaker while I was microwaving soup and I dropped the whole bowl on the floor. I called Mara after that. It was after midnight. I expected voicemail. She answered immediately. "You heard them again," she said. Not hello, not who is this, just certainty. "Yeah." A pause. Then, "Stay where you are, I'm coming over." I should tell you that I almost said no. Not because I didn't want her there, because I did. Too much for how little time had passed. She came anyway. Gray sweater, no makeup, hair still damp from the weather. She stood in my apartment kitchen with her coat unbuttoned and looked around like she was checking for structural weakness in my life. "You live exactly how I expected," she said. I blinked. "Is that an insult?" "It's an observation." She glanced at the sink. 2 mugs, no matching plates, 1 dying plant. I've had a hard few days. The plant has had a harder few months. That made me laugh at a time I honestly didn't think I could. She heard the laugh and looked up. For 1 second, neither of us moved. Then she said, much quieter, "Good. I wanted to make sure you still could." We sat on my living room floor because I hadn't cleaned the couch, and that suddenly felt too intimate. Midnight turned into 1, then 2. She told me she hadn't slept through a full night in nearly a year. I told her I kept replaying the moment I ran. "You were alive," she said. "I left them. You were alive." I'm not sure that feels like a defense. That was the first time she touched me on purpose. Just her hand over mine on the carpet. Warm this time, steady. "It's not a defense," she said. "It's a fact. Sometimes facts are all we get." I looked at our hands for a second too long. So did she. Then she took hers back and the room got strangely colder. 3 nights later, I caught her outside the supermarket, alone. Rowan's car was there too. They were standing near the chain-link perimeter under a streetlight that kept flickering. He was saying something urgent. She looked exhausted and stubborn. And I, being an adult man with a flawless command of my emotions, immediately assumed the worst. I got out of my truck and said, "You didn't mention this was a group activity." They both turned. Mara's expression changed first. Surprise, then annoyance, then something more complicated. Rowan just looked tired. "You shouldn't be here." "That's funny," I said. "I was about to say the same thing." Mara stepped toward me. "Don't do this." "Do what?" Her eyes flashed. "Make this about you because you don't like not knowing things." It landed because it was true. I looked from her to Rowan. So tell me." She was quiet for a beat. Wind pushed loose hair across her face. She didn't tuck it back. "Tomorrow the city signs off on demolition," she said. "Rowan got me the timing." I stared at her. "You were going to let them blow that place open without warning anyone what's in it?" "No," she said. "I was going in first." That knocked every other feeling aside. "What?" "There are records in the office basement," she said. "Security backups, old intercom logs, maybe enough proof to keep someone from treating this like a gas leak and moving on." "You were going in alone?" "I wasn't asking permission," Rowan muttered. "Told you." I ignored him. "Mara, absolutely not." Something raw shifted in her face. "Daniel is still in there." The words hung between us, not as fact exactly, as grief, and suddenly all my anger felt childish. She looked away first. "I know what you're about to say, that he's gone, that whatever is in there isn't him. I know that. I know." Her voice broke on the second no. "It just matters to me that I'm the one who stops waiting." God, that line. I walked toward her before I could think about what I was doing, stopped close enough to see how tired she really was. "You're not going alone," I said. She laughed once, humorless. "You don't get a vote." "I get one if I'm the reason you'd survive 5 extra minutes." Her eyes lifted to mine. There was so much in them then. Anger, fear, exhaustion, and something else she kept trying not to name. Rowan cleared his throat like he regretted having one. "I'm standing right here." Neither of us looked at him. That night we drove out to the edge of the city to wait for dawn and a window to get inside before demolition crews arrived. The roads were empty. Mara sat in my passenger seat with her head tipped back and her eyes shut. I could tell by the tension in her mouth that she wasn't sleeping. At a red light she said, "You make reckless decisions for someone so emotionally articulate." I glanced at her. "That's the nicest insult anyone's given me." It wasn't an insult. That silenced me. A few minutes later, softer, she added, "That's why I'm scared of you." I kept my eyes on the road because looking at her felt too dangerous. "Because I'm reckless? Because you notice things." "Yes," she said. "That's why I know this is a bad idea." Neither of us told the other to turn back. We parked behind the loading dock just before sunrise. The rear service door was chained by the city, but Rowan had quietly left bolt cutters under a tarp by the dumpster. Mara found them without comment. I tried not to be jealous of how well other men had learned to help her. Tried and failed, if I'm honest. When she handed me the cutters, our gloves bumped. Tiny thing, still enough to make my chest tighten. Inside, the store smelled even worse than before. No radio voices, no movement, just the hum of distant electricity and our footsteps in the old hallway. Mara stayed close enough that the sleeve of her coat brushed mine every few steps. Neither of us mentioned it. Neither of us moved apart. We made it to the office, found the stairwell down to a cramped records room, found the backups too. Hard drives, paper files, dust. Nothing supernatural about any of it. Mara froze. After surviving a night of voices, fire, and ghosts from their past, Eli and Mara found something stronger than fear, each other. The horror faded, but what remained was trust, healing, and the quiet promise that neither of them would face the dark alone